Imagine living in a time where extraordinary miracles and revolutionary ideas roamed the streets, and at the center stood a figure whose true appearance was shrouded in mystery. What if I told you that the description of Jesus Christ we think we know could be entirely wrong? A forgotten letter from Pontius Pilate to Emperor Tiberius reveals shocking details about Jesus' look and presents details never mentioned in the Gospels. So, what did Pilate really say? He described a man whose striking features defy our modern perceptions, turning our understanding of this iconic figure upside down. Stay tuned as we unearth the truths buried in history. The air in Judea was unlike anything Pontius Pilate had ever encountered before. As the newly appointed governor, he arrived with a sense of duty and authority, carrying the weight of Rome's expectations on his shoulders. Yet, immediately upon his entrance to this ancient land, he was met not with the welcome a Roman might expect, but with an intense, almost palpable tension. The streets buzzed with an undercurrent of resentment as the locals eyed him warily, their gazes a blend of curiosity and cautious mistrust. Pilate understood that his task was far from simple. Establishing Roman authority in Judea was a political and social challenge unlike any he had faced before. The first interactions with the Jewish leaders set the tone for what would be a tumultuous tenure. These leaders, steeped in tradition and with a fierce sense of identity, approached Pilate not with deference, but with a cautious diplomacy. It became apparent quickly that they viewed the Roman authority as an imposition, an unwelcome intrusion into their spiritual and cultural lives. The Sanhedrin, a powerful assembly of Jewish leaders, was particularly keen on ensuring that their laws and customs were respected. Yet, Pilate, used to the Roman way of administration, approached the situation with a rigid adherence to the empire's strategies. Pilate's early attempts to assert Roman dominance were met with subtle resistance and outright hostility. He underestimated the deep-seated religious convictions of the Jewish people, separatists despite being bound by Roman chains. More than a few times his decisions, made in the interest of consolidating power, stoked the people's ire. Acts as simple as the introduction of Roman standards, emblazoned with the emperor's likeness into Jerusalem, sparked protests. The imagery clashing with Jewish proscriptions against graven images, Pilate found himself navigating these complexities, trying to balance the demands of Rome with the sensibilities of the locals, a task that was increasingly proving to be onerous. In official recounts, Pilate expressed exasperation at the layers of tension he had to sift through. He noted how every political decision seemed to ripple outward, influencing more than just the administrative functions of Roman governance. Each decision was a catalyst, affecting the social and religious dynamics in ways he could not have initially predicted. Pilate's letters to Tiberius reflected an increasing awareness that ruling over Judea required more than a display of Roman might. It required a tacit sensitivity to a culture rich in history and fiercely protective of its beliefs. The local Jewish leaders, despite their apparent cordiality in diplomatic dealings, were quick to exploit any missteps Pilate made. The governor's unfamiliarity with their intricate customs and religious laws often left him vulnerable to manipulation. He learned, not without difficulty, that negotiations here required more than the art of persuasion. They required a careful dance around deeply held traditions, an understanding that the Jewish people were fighting to preserve their identity under the weight of an occupying force. Pilate also faced unexpected challenges from the Jewish populace itself, who employed tactics of both passive resistance and active defiance to express their dissatisfaction with Roman rule. His attempts to fund ambitious public works by appropriating resources from the temple treasury led to significant unrest. It was a clear example of how misjudgment could escalate tensions, with the people coming together to voice their dissent in ways that sometimes bordered on revolt. This complexity threw Pilate into a storm of administrative chaos, a frantic balancing act of appeasing Rome while attempting to quell local unrest. It forced him to see Judea not just a province to be managed, but as a living, breathing organism with a spirit that defied subjugation. His initial resolve gave way to caution, a tactical retreat from aggression towards a more measured approach. As the days in Judea stretched into weeks and months, Pilate's reports to Rome hinted at the development of a more nuanced understanding. The governor started appreciating the importance of compromise and negotiation, albeit under the steady, watchful eyes of the Jewish leaders who never missed an opportunity to assert their own form of soft power. These interactions gradually taught Pilate that his governance required flexibility and, more importantly, an acute perception of the socio-political landscape in Judea. Pilate's struggle to assert Roman authority saw him grappling with a society deeply entrenched in its own values. He faced a delicate and indispensable need to adapt, even if that adaptation ran counter to his traditional Roman instincts. Unfolding in this setting was a vivid tableau of unease that foreshadowed future events Pilate could scarcely imagine, events that would eventually bring him face to face with individuals who could challenge not just his role as governor, but the very fabric of Roman power in the region. This layered introduction to the complexities of Judean society was crucial for Pilate's upcoming challenges, one of which would involve a man whose influence sparked a movement that transcended all socio-political expectations, a man from Nazareth, whose message of peace and compassion would soon catch Pilate's attention, heralding a confrontation between earthly authority and transcendent message. There was a hushed excitement in the air when Pilate first learned of the Nazarene. Not through official channels, nor from advisories of rebellion or sedition as one might expect. Instead, it was through the whispered reports carried by those within his household. The murmurs from servants and the occasional confidant, those who ventured into the streets, the markets, and mingled among the people, often reached his ears with a curious regularity. They spoke of a man who taught on hillsides and by lakes, drawing crowds that swelled in number with each passing day. Pilate, bound by his obligations as governor, found himself torn between the responsibilities of his office and the unsettling fascination that these reports inspired. His role demanded a strict monitoring of any influence that could disrupt the fragile peace of Judea, yet something about the descriptions of Jesus stirred a deeper contemplation. The words carried with them stories of profound wisdom, acts of kindness, and miracles that seemed to defy natural explanation. At first, Pilate's knowledge of Jesus was mediated through his trusted secretary, a man charged with ensuring Pilate was kept well informed of any potential threats to Roman rule. The secretary, meticulous as ever, recounted various encounters he had witnessed personally, and those from reliable sources: the healings, the parables, and the growing conviction of the followers, ordinary folk transformed by the Nazarene's presence and teaching. The details piqued Pilate's interest, not simply because of their exotica, but because they painted a picture of a figure unlike any other he had encountered. The teachings of Jesus were reported as profound, touching on the deepest truths, yet conveyed with simplicity and clarity that spoke directly to the hearts of men and women. It was said that he taught with a gentle authority that captivated even the most skeptical listeners. Pilate's thoughts lingered on how such a man could sway multitudes without a hint of ambition or desire for power. His teachings, so his secretary relayed, emphasized love, forgiveness, and a kingdom not of this world, a concept both beautiful and perplexing to a Roman mind trained in political survival and supremacy. Intrigued and perhaps sensing a need to understand this influence more personally, Pilate eventually orchestrated a meeting. The governor's duties had familiarized him with countless rebels, prophets, and zealots, each indistinguishable from the next, all of whom ultimately met with the might of Rome's unyielding order. Jesus, however, upon entering Pilate's view, was different. Jesus did not exude the fiery rhetoric or fierce ambition that often marked those who challenged Roman authority. Instead, there was a profound calm and assuredness about him. During their brief but intense conversation, Pilate found himself unexpectedly challenged not by forceful arguments or demanding assertions, but by a quiet strength and a penetrating insight that seemed to lay bare the very soul of any who stood before him. In those moments, it was not Pilate who tested Jesus, but rather the opposite. Pilate struggled with tumultuous emotions. He was a man of status, power, and responsibility to the emperor, yet here he was, momentarily unsettled by a carpenter from Nazareth. The encounter touched a chord within him, a sense of witnessing something truly extraordinary. It was as if Jesus' very presence conveyed secrets of a different kind of power, one that could unite, transform, and inspire without resorting to force or fear. In the exchange, Pilate perceived a glimmer of truth that he could neither fully grasp nor altogether dismiss. It was as if Jesus beckoned not with authority recognizable by Roman standards, but with an invitation to consider a deeper reality, a kingdom governed not by legions, but by love and truth. A kingdom that seemed to challenge the very fabric of imperial power, not by overthrowing it, but by rendering its foundations increasingly insubstantial in light of a higher call. As the moonlight filtered gently through the cracks of Pilate's private chambers later that night, the Roman governor grappled with his thoughts. On one hand, recognizing the potential threat posed by the Nazarene's influence on the colonial equilibrium; on the other, confronting an unexpected resonance within him, a realization that he had encountered something or someone beyond ordinary reckoning, an enigma wrapped in humility and wisdom. Pilate's inner turmoil was nothing short of extraordinary. Governed by duty, he was nevertheless moved by a more powerful personal conviction, however inarticulate. Behind the facade of power and control, aspects of Pilate's humanity sought clarity, understanding, perhaps even redemption, a notion foreign to his duties but not to his heart. While the responsibilities of his office demanded vigilance and action, Pilate found himself reflecting on whether this meeting, this man, was meant to provoke a change not only in the political state, but also within himself. The fullness of this encounter remained elusive to him, a mystery both unsettling and wondrous, sitting silently between the demands of empire and the yearning for truth. Thus, Pilate lingered in this duality of thought, balancing the demands of his position with what the encounter suggested of a higher purpose, savvy enough to see the fine line he tread, yet human enough to ponder what deeper currents might flow beneath his calculated exterior. As the sun rose on what seemed to be an inexorably tragic day, Pontius Pilate found himself engulfed in a storm of unrest. It wasn't merely the political tension that gnawed at his core, but the profound moral complexity that lay beneath the surface of his role as the Roman governor. Pilate had already encountered Jesus, both indirectly and directly, and was left somewhat startled by the calm wisdom and magnetic presence the Nazarene prophet exuded. However, the influence Jesus wielded was becoming a source of unrest among the Jewish leaders, and that unrest was spilling over into the streets of Jerusalem. The demand for Jesus' trial came like relentless waves battering at Pilate's resolve. Jesus was brought before him early that morning, bound and surrounded by a crowd brimming with fervor and expectation. The charges against Jesus were not ordinary. They were deeply rooted in religious and communal discord. The Jewish leaders accused him of blasphemy and misleading the nation, a serious charge that seemed to bear the weight of heaven and earth. Yet Pilate, a pragmatic ruler, struggled to find fault worthy of death. In the cacophony of accusations and defenses, Pilate attempted to appease the Jewish leaders and the clamorous crowd. He interrogated Jesus, probing for anything that would justify their demands. Yet, Jesus remained composed, responding with a serenity that spoke of an inner truth. Pilate found himself caught between the compelling innocence of this man and the pressing demands of those who saw no other solution but execution. Pilate's heart was troubled. He had been warned by his wife, Claudia Procula, who had troubling dreams about Jesus, imploring him to have nothing to do with this righteous man. These words lingered as ominous echoes in his conscience. However, under Roman law and tradition, the governor was bound to public peace. Despite his sympathy, the uproar was growing, voices woven with both desperation and determination, pleading for a verdict. In an effort to distance himself from the looming decision, Pilate offered the gathered crowd a choice: to release Jesus or Barabbas, a known insurrectionist. The choice was strategic, an opportunity for the crowd to display mercy, perhaps even to release Pilate from his moral quandary. Yet, to his astonishment, the name of Barabbas was chanted with a fervor connoting rebellion. It was a choice that defied logic, burdening Pilate with the condemnation of an innocent man. Facing an uprising that could spiral beyond control, Pilate steeled himself and delivered the decree of crucifixion, washing his hands in symbolic surrender to the forces at play. Yet this gesture brought no peace to his troubled spirit. He authorized the brutality of scourging, a spectacle meant to satiate the hunger of the masses for retribution, to soften their hearts, or perhaps to further confirm Jesus' innocence in the public eye. But the crowd roared louder for crucifixion, a testament to how fear and the distortion of truth can overpower justice. As Jesus was led to Golgotha, the sky itself seemed to darken in mournful sympathy. Pilate watched from a distance, the weight of his decision heavier than the Roman standards of authority he bore. The crucifixion, unfolded with startling supernatural events. An earthquake trembled through the land, and darkness enveloped the earth in midday. It was as if the cosmos itself bore witness to the gravity of the act, to the man suspended between heaven and earth. In those final moments, as Jesus uttered, "It is finished," a sense of foreboding swept over Pilate. He observed reactions from the centurion and others close to the scene who declared Jesus as the Son of God. This proclamation, amidst the eerie silence that followed, left an indelible mark on Pilate's consciousness. It became apparent to him that the implications of this execution transcended earthly realms, touching upon divine intervention. Though outwardly Pilate might have maintained a facade of Roman indifference, his soul wrestled with what could not be unseen, an act which bore consequences beyond his governance, challenging both faith and reason. His narrative resonated with the conflicted nature of man in the face of destiny, essence of enamored power confronted by the purity of truth, a dichotomy that prophesied a monumental shift in the world he knew. As night fell, Pilate's thoughts lingered on what was beyond his understanding, foreshadowing a story of resurrection and transformation. In the fading light of the day following the tumultuous events surrounding Jesus' trial and crucifixion, an unexpected tranquility fell upon the city of Jerusalem. It was as if the very air held its breath, waiting for something significant to unfold in the aftermath of a momentous day. Pilate, burdened with the gravity of his decisions and the consequent reverberations across this ancient city, found himself plunged into a deep contemplation of what had occurred and what the rest of the world was whispering about a resurrection, a risen king. Word traveled swiftly within the corridors of power, much like wildfire in a parched forest, igniting discussions and speculations among the Roman elite and Jewish leaders alike. The guards stationed at the tomb had come forward with a story so improbable that it sounded like the product of overactive imaginations or, to the more spiritually inclined, a signal of divine intervention. They claimed that a dazzling entity descended from the heavens, rolling away the massive stone sealing the tomb, leaving it unguardedly empty. This account set the stage for growing murmurs of Jesus' followers who dared to proclaim that their teacher had indeed risen, just as he had promised. Pilate pondered this verse that predicted such a resurrection. "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." John 2:19. It was becoming evident that the execution he had presided over was just the beginning of a narrative that was reshaping itself into prophecies and promises, a phenomenon not bound by death, but rather animated by it. Amidst these chaotic rumblings of resurrection, Pilate encountered a formidable realization about power and authority. Here was a man, Jesus, executed under Roman law, who might emerge from death's clutches, unfurling an epoch where the might of swords and empires quivered before the soft-spoken decrees of a carpenter's son. What disturbs the mightiest of rulers is not usually the clamor of defiance, but the unshakable certainty of a movement that draws its strength from higher convictions than any temporal dominion. This resurrection narrative, however implausible it initially seemed, whispered a challenge to the existing order that Pilate could not ignore. Among the Jewish leaders, opinions diverged greatly. Some continued to question the authenticity of the resurrection tales, positing theories of body theft, while others, perhaps disturbed by their own complicity in Jesus' death, hesitated, wondering if they had been on the wrong side of history. The Sanhedrin, traditionally staunch protectors of religious orthodoxy, found themselves grappling with genuine fear that Jesus' absence from the tomb heralded divine acknowledgement of his claims. Pilate, reflecting on all these elements, acknowledged the futility in his previous efforts to placate either the religious leaders or the masses. In attempting to curb the upheaval Jesus had instigated, Pilate had unwittingly amplified it, propelling forward a message that was proving impervious to earthly measures. A new era seemed on the horizon, one which promised extensive ramifications not just for Judea, but potentially setting ripples across the Roman provinces and beyond. The growing followers of Jesus, now more emboldened, embodied an unyielding resolve. Their faith had crystallized into something formidable and profoundly compelling, founded on the belief that their master transcended the limitations of mortality. Each testimony of encounter, each whispered recount of a vision or exchanged glance with the risen Jesus, was a robust fortification of their burgeoning movement. These tales spun vivid imagery, leaving spectators who once stood idly at the fringes now compelled to pause and listen. Even as Pilate lingered on these reflections, grappling with their intrinsic implications, a pervasive foreboding ensnared him. A singular figure's bearing could seemingly defy an empire, shifting power dynamics in ways unforeseen. What if the seemingly impossible had indeed occurred? The suggestion that divine will interceded within human affairs called into question the stability and equity of Roman control, not by force, but by virtue of righteousness, a concept that could ripple through his own governance more potently than any conquering legion. Driven by both a recognition of these subtler forces and a dawning awareness of his limitations, Pilate's musings were not only a reflection of the past, but a portent of what it might entail for the future. The roles of leaders, kings, and governors were entering uncharted territories. The rising whispers of an empty tomb seemed to echo with the hushed warnings of countless generations that empires may rise and fall, but some stories transcend temporal finitudes, speaking to eternity.